The man you see smiling at his brother during his sentencing is Jason Vukovich. He earned himself the name the Alaskan Avenger when he began hunting down and attacking men convicted of abusing minors. And soon, you'll hear the story directly from him in an exclusive interview.
911. Police? Ambulance?
Yes. Some guy just broke in with a hammer.
He broke into your house?
Yes. I've never seen him before.
When a string of break-ins and assaults began terrifying the residents of Anchorage, Alaska, the police were desperate to find out who was responsible. As the police investigated, they soon realized that the 3 break-in victims all shared a disturbing background that would bust the case wide open. As Alaska became the center of a media storm, the police were left trying to puzzle out the perpetrator's motive. Was he a vigilante who believed he could take justice into his own hands? Or were these violent crimes all part of a revenge spree? On June 24, 2016, Charles Albee was enjoying a peaceful morning in his home when he heard a knock at his door. Not suspecting anything dangerous could be on the other side, Charles opened it to find a tall man with dark shoulder-length hair and a black leather jacket staring down at him. The man forced his way into Charles' home and ordered him to sit on his bed. Charles followed the man's orders, but still, that didn't stop him from facing the man's wrath. The intruder slapped Charles around a few times and detailed how he was able to find Charles's address. He then stole a few items from Charles's home and fled. As soon as the intruder was gone, Charles called the police and told them everything he could remember about the man, including the fact that he appeared to be holding a notebook with a list of names in it. He also told them something about himself, which would soon be a key piece of evidence for the police. Charles Albee was convicted in 2003 of second-degree abuse of a minor, and the intruder had found his address through an offender registry. 3 days later, the police received a late-night call from a man named Andres Barbosa. According to Andres, he had been sleeping in his home when frantic knocking on his door woke him up at 4 a.m. When he opened the door, he was greeted by a tall man in a black leather jacket, as well as 2 women. The group pushed their way into Andres' home and ordered him to sit in a chair. Following their instructions, Andres sat and suddenly one of the women pulled out her phone and began recording. The intruder then punched Andres several times before threatening to, quote, bash in his dome with a hammer. The man then berated him and stated that he was here to collect what Andres owed. With the women's help, the man stole several things from Andres' home, including the man's truck, before the group fled the scene. While police were already pretty certain that this attack was related to Charles's break-in 2 days prior, there were enough differences that there was a possibility it could be someone else. For instance, the 2 women involved in Andres' assault had not been reported at the previous break-in. Additionally, the hammer used by the perpetrator in Andres' assault wasn't present in the assault against Charles. However, once officers learned that Andres Barbosa was a child abuser who was placed on the registry in 2014 after being caught with inappropriate photos of minors, they knew the 2 cases were connected. With this information, the police were beginning to see a pattern forming. Was this man going after child abusers? Was he just a man who had decided that the child abuser registry was an easy way to find potential break-ins? Or was there more to his motive? Detectives wouldn't have to wait long to find out, as 2 days later, another break-in was reported. However, this one had escalated much further than the others. On June 29th, police responded to a 911 call of another break-in, this time one that had ended in violent bloodshed. After arriving and rushing the man, Wesley Demarest, to the hospital, they were able to interview him and get an idea of what had taken place that night.
Start from the beginning and tell me what happened tonight.
Well, I was asleep. My roommate pounded on my door or something. I woke up and he said somebody's trying to break in. So I got out of bed, and by the time I got to my door, there was some guy standing there with a hammer. The guy told my roommate just to go sit down somewhere. Didn't do anything.
Okay.
Then he started yelling at me about sex offender. It was 2006. I had a conviction.
Okay.
I had attempted something or other with my step-granddaughter.
Okay.
And he said that he was avenging something. He kept swinging the hammer back and forth. Told me to get down on my knees, which I didn't. Then he told me to lay down on my bed, which I didn't. And then he slapped me a couple of times, or I tried to hit him in the throat a couple of times. Tried to push him. Then he told me to get down on my knees. So I think then he hit me with the hammer on the side of my face.
Wesley Demarest is a registered child abuser who only served 9 months in jail for attempting to assault his kindergarten-aged granddaughter. It wouldn't take long for them to find the man responsible for the attack. The 911 call from Wesley's roommate had mentioned that the intruder left the house in a car shortly before the police arrived, so there was a good chance the man was still in the area.
This guy's leaving now. He's getting in his car now.
What kind of car?
It's a small car.
Would you feel safe going to check on your roommate to make sure he's okay?
Yeah, I'm going to go there now. Oh, man, he's really bleeding. We need an ambulance,
He's
too.
bleeding?
Yes.
Okay, where's he bleeding from?
He's bleeding from his head.
After searching through nearby roads, the police pulled over a suspicious Honda Civic not far from the victim's home. An officer approached the vehicle and introduced himself to the driver, a man by the name of Jason Vukovich. To the officer's surprise, Jason quickly and freely admitted to being the man who broke into Wesley's home. Realizing that they'd finally found their intruder, the officer began recording a preliminary interview with Jason. The officer's roadside interview with Jason started out fairly standard, with the officer reading Jason his Miranda rights and questioning him about what exactly went on at Wesley's house. When Jason is reluctant to talk about the actual attack with Wesley, despite admitting to being the perpetrator, the officer changes tactics and begins questioning Jason on how he discovered Wesley in the first place.
I believe it is the sex offender and kidnapping. So you just saw the address, saw this guy, decided to go over to his house? Absolutely not. Okay, how did you decide to go over here? Well, I went to the bistro first. Right. That's where you work? And I talked to the executive chef, because I absolutely will not make any maneuver, period. Take any actions at all unless I go see her first. And what's her name? Her name is Cherie. And I've been working for this family for 40 years. Oh, 40 years. Yeah, okay. Correct. She has no relationship. Cherie doesn't know these people here, does she? I can't speak on anything that she does or doesn't know. I don't want to say something like that. What I do know is this. I will never take any action unless I go see my handler first. Okay.
This answer from Jason immediately gives the officer some crucial insight into his psyche. It appears Jason is displaying delusions of grandeur by seeing Cherie as his CIA handler, which is a common symptom of bipolar disorder. While it is fully possible that Jason is just saying these things to confuse or deceive the officer, it seems much more likely that Jason has convinced himself Cherie is a handler, sending him out on righteous missions. Those with bipolar disorders also suffer through phases of mania, where they may experience extreme happiness, anger, poor judgment, and paranoia. It's possible that Jason was in the throes of a manic phase when he decided to attack his 3 victims. After talking to the officer about Cherie, Jason was comfortable enough to tell them how he broke into Wesley's house with a hammer and got into an altercation with him.
How'd you get into the guy's house? What's the deal with the hammer? Well, that's how I got in his house. You broke your window, pried the door open? Yeah. Okay, and then you go talk to the gentleman? I attempted to, yeah. Okay. What happened? Did you assault him? He started freaking out, going wild. My intention tonight was to sit him down and remind him his family, nothing like this is what's going to happen. I was giving him some open hand slaps because that's typically an appropriate way. So open hand slaps? To notify someone that what they're doing is extremely inappropriate. Okay, how many of those? 7. 7 of them? Okay. And then what happened? Did you assault him with a hammer at all? No, he started attacking. Started attacking you? Correct. Yeah. Was he attacking you with his fists? Or? Oh, yeah, he's kind of a big guy. He's pretty big guy. I didn't realize he was like 6'6" and kind of a monster. So let me tell you once again, courage is acting in spite of him. Sure, we got that. So he attacked me, and I'm really not much of a fighter, to be honest with you, seriously.
While Jason's account of events did slightly contradict that of both Wesley and his roommate, this interview made it clear to police that Jason was the intruder. Not only that, but his comments made them confident in the fact that he had also been responsible for the other 2 break-ins as well. Despite Jason being the only one involved with this break-in, he wasn't actually alone in the car. In the passenger seat was a woman named Elisa Geisler, whom police suspected was potentially one of the women involved in the break-in and assault of Andres Barbosa. Both Jason and Elisa were brought into custody for further questioning, as officers hoped that these 2 could shed more light on the many questions surrounding the case. First and foremost, why had Jason started hunting down offenders? Elisa was the first one to be interviewed at the police station. Detective Landis, the main investigator conducting the interrogation, walks into the interrogation room, only to find Elisa asleep in her chair. He tries to begin the interrogation after waking Elisa up. However, she's crashing from a high on methamphetamines and is struggling to stay awake. It's slightly questionable that officers would choose to interview Elisa in this state, as her inebriated state would affect both her judgment and her memory. Additionally, Elisa's mental state hinders her ability to make decisions, including consenting to the police interrogation. Despite this, officers are able to get a few key pieces of information out of her.
Is there a hammer in the car?
Oh, yeah. There it is.
Lisa, if I want to get the hammer, where do I need to look in the car to find it?
I think it's just right there in the front seat.
Front seat? Okay.
Given the state Wesley was found in, it's likely that this hammer would be covered in blood. If the police were able to recover it from Jason's car, it could serve as damning DNA evidence against him. Alongside this information, Elisa is also able to nudge detectives closer towards Jason's motive.
Does Jason have a particular dislike for sex offenders? Has he ever talked to you about that?
Most of you that have been to jail. I have a special dislike for them, yes. I would say yes.
Unfortunately, before the detectives can get any more useful information out of Elisa, she passes out once more. After letting Elisa sleep for a few minutes, they try to interrogate her again. At first, it seems that she's just giving them more of the same information, until she mentions something interesting.
What was the conversation that Lucky had with you when he came out of the house? Did he say anything about hurting somebody or doing what was righteous?
Yeah,
or
something like that, probably.
Probably? Do you remember what it was?
Doing the work of the righteous.
It seems like here the detectives are attempting to use words that the other witnesses used in order to spark Elisa's memory and try to engage her. While this would normally be frowned upon in interviews, Elisa is extremely sedated and unlikely to provide any helpful information on her own. It might have been beneficial for the officers to let her sleep it off for longer and try to talk to her more openly when she was coherent, but they may have been worried that she wouldn't cooperate when she sobered up. The only person who could confirm or deny this for the police would be Jason himself, and it was finally time to interview him. In this interrogation, Detective Anderson takes over while Detective Landis sits in. Unlike most people brought in on assault and robbery charges, Jason is overwhelmingly friendly towards the detectives and is happy to chat their ears off. Despite his charming and polite demeanor, Jason avoids actually answering many of the detectives' questions, instead going into detail about his philosophies on life.
I mow the lawn with that and pull weeds and change light bulbs. And the reason why is because I'm attempting to demonstrate humility.
Detective Anderson stays calm and friendly towards Jason as he rants and slowly prods at him until Jason gives the detectives some useful information. By keeping his cool and acting like Jason's friend, the detective is able to build up a rapport with Jason and earn his trust. This tactic works, and Jason eventually gives the detective some information they can work with.
I'm just trying to get a sense of what's been going on.
I guess without getting into a whole bunch of unnecessary specifics, I can tell you that what's been going on is hard work.
Okay.
And hard work out of concern for kids.
Jason makes it clear to the detectives that everything he's done has been out of concern for children, and he even gives them extra insight on how he views his crimes against offenders.
People who have committed crimes against children have been convicted in a court of law, and you want to see that these people get what you believe they deserve. Is that not correct, or is that correct?
Let me think. Yeah. Be careful how I respond.
Okay.
This is what I would like to say. Do I think taking retributive action on people that have done something to kids, wanton or otherwise, is what I want. I have to say, not specifically, no. It's not my desire to go running willy-nilly through this life, doing something like that.
Maybe what you want isn't the right phrase. Maybe it's what you feel you are required to do, or that it's the right thing to do.
Those are both extremely accurate statements.
So even though you may not particularly want to do it, it's kind of a sense of duty.
Oh, absolutely. Without a doubt. It's kind of the way I say it is, I wouldn't expect to have privilege or extra freedom in this life without also being willing to participate in the entire practice. Not just okay, cool, I can have all the good stuff, but none of the work.
Yeah. Well, I think when you use the term work, that's probably what I'm seeing is it's out of a sense of duty. It's actual work. It's not something you enjoy to do, but it's something you're required to do or you feel obligated to do.
That is without any exception the case. And I can tell you that internally I am in no way, shape, or form a violent or dangerous person. I certainly have no assaults on my record. I would not seek to I would say I would derive no joy from a person's suffering anywhere.
Jason's urge to protect children is certainly admirable, but he could just be using that as a convenient excuse to enact violence on others. The police have to determine how much of this is true in order to fully understand Jason's motive. Unfortunately for the detectives, Jason's refusal to answer most questions in a straightforward manner makes it hard for them to get any concrete details out of him, forcing them to look elsewhere for information.
Hello?
Hey, this is Jim Anderson with APD. I got word from at the DA's office that you had some info about Vukovich and what he was doing last time he was locked up.
He was talking to others about where they would go around and find guys that were convicted of child molestation or whatever, and he would tell them that they would provide them protection, but that they were keeping an eye on them, and that they knew who they were, and was trying to recruit other guys to join him in doing that.
It wasn't hard for Detective Anderson to acquire Jason's rather extensive rap sheet, and it became evident that Jason had a history of trying to deal with offenders. Now that there was more than enough evidence to prove Jason was responsible for the break-ins and assaults, it was just a matter of time until his trial and sentencing. While sitting in jail, Jason came up with a plea deal that would not only shock the press and the police, but would also reveal to the world the true reason he went after these offenders. On September 16, 2016, several months after his initial arrest, Jason sent a letter to the Anchorage Daily News claiming that he would be willing to serve the combined sentencing of not only his 3 victims, but also the sentence given to Jason's stepfather, the man who assaulted him as a child, but never served time for the crime. With the publishing of this letter, it became clear to the world that Jason wasn't just attacking offenders in an attempt to keep the local children safe. He was someone who had gone through the same pain and confusion that these offenders' victims had gone through. In his mind, he was going to do whatever he could to make sure that none of the men he could find would ever hurt a child like that again. The question was, is this vigilante justice or revenge? Well, we reached out to Jason, and he recounted that final incident that resulted in his arrest.
I started going places and knocking on doors. And, for the most part, delivering a pretty stern sermon and giving these guys a message of sitting them down in a chair, instilling through fear that, hey, there's people around here that care about these kids. Like, I never wore a mask. I never brought a gun. I never, this was not like some sort of murderous mission by any means. The last one I went to this guy's house, and I was knocking on all the windows and doors for probably 45 minutes. His lights were on, telling him to come outside. I needed to talk to him, and I knew he was awake. Obviously, he didn't want to come out and see me. So I grabbed a hammer out of a tool bag in the back of my car, and I used it to smash out the side light of his window and then climbed inside. He was a relatively wealthy person with his home had been converted, unbeknownst to me, to some sort of a bed and breakfast that was on a lake. And so a guy and a lady were coming out of one of the bedroom doors, and I knew they weren't him because I'd seen his picture. So I told him, "Get back in the bedroom. This doesn't have anything to do with you." And then I went into the master bedroom and get in there, and this guy is probably, I don't know, 6'4", 6'5", 300 pounds. This is a big guy. And I told him to sit down on the bed, and he didn't want to, and he started pushing on me a little bit, and then he started punching me in the face. Then I got angry, and I realized I had that hammer in the bag on the floor in between us, and so I just squatted down and picked it up, and I hit him one time, and then in the course of the struggle, I hit him 2 more times. I told him, "You know, you can consider me an avenging angel for the children you're molesting." And anyway, I'm assuming that the couple that I told to get back in the bedroom called the police, because by the time that whole physical altercation was over, I got back in the car and the police were already coming in, and they stopped the car. And police were patting me on the back, asking me, "Man, did you get that motherfucker? Did you get him good?" We're shaking my hand, all this sort of stuff. I was in shock. Ambulance is going by. I'm thinking to myself, you know, I'm probably just killed this person. The rest of my life is gone. I am not a violent person, and I don't take joy in any sort of violent confrontations. I never have been, never will be. However, when you're regressed to the state of a child and you realize this time I'm going to win against this sort of person, there's some sort of a strange, you know, it's just sort of a strange feeling in that moment that it needs to happen, or it needed to happen. That's the best way I can explain it.
In a recent interview conducted with the Unforbidden Truth podcast, Jason recounted his childhood and how it led him down this path of a violent crime spree.
You know, I have no memories whatsoever of about 12 years old on back. So I suppose, and I think that's a trauma-related response.
Jason's memories began with the abuse from his stepfather, Larry Lee Fulton. Jason and his brother Joel were both subject to abuse at Larry's hands, with the monster creating a custom 2x4 with a 2-handed grip to beat the backs of his stepson's legs. Not only did the 2 young boys have to grapple with beating so brutal they struggled to stand, but their stepfather soon began assaulting them during late-night prayer sessions.
My brother and I shared a room where he would come in and, you know, try to touch our genitals and all types of things like that. And again, as young kids, it's extremely difficult to make sense of what's happening to you.
While struggling to deal with the mental turmoil caused by his stepfather's actions, Jason turned to his mother for help.
Neither one of us had the courage to say anything, so I told Joel, that's my brother, I'm going to tell Mom what he's doing. So I told her, and she absolutely didn't believe a word we said and made me sit there on a kitchen stool until he came home from work, and then had him march in the kitchen, and she did the standard, you know, tell him what you told me, made me recite the abuse to him, which he basically was very dismissive about, and mumbled something about being curious about whether we were maturing or, you know, something like that.
Jason and Joel were forced to endure the coming years with no hope of help from any adult in their lives. Eventually, it got to be too much for Joel, and he ran away from home, leaving Jason to face the full wrath of their stepfather. Joel was eventually found by the cops and was arrested for being a runaway. However, Joel made the brave decision to tell the cops why he ran away. An investigation into Larry Fulton was started, and he was eventually found guilty on charges of second-degree abuse of a minor. In the grand scheme of things, this charge was meaningless. Instead of sending Larry to prison or removing Joel and Jason from his abusive care, the state of Alaska suspended the 3 years of prison Larry was sentenced to as a part of his plea deal and sent him right back home to torment his children more. Not only did Joel face physical punishment from his stepfather for going to the police, but he claims he was also mocked and ridiculed by other members of his family for his confession. Joel and Jason were pulled from school immediately after Larry's trial, and the family moved to a town where Larry's abuse would be less known. Looking for any way to get out of the house, Jason began taking odd jobs fishing, hunting, or doing commercial work. Through these jobs, he was able to save up some money, and at the age of 16, Jason snuck out his bedroom window and ran away like his brother had done 3 years prior.
Part of the process of leaving home, my parents found out I had been sneaking out, so I came home from one of those nights, and my clothing was in trash bags on the front porch, and all of the windows and doors were locked, and they had kept my driver's license and my social security card, all my identifying papers.
Jason was able to afford a plane ride to Spokane, Washington with what money he had left, but with no ID, he was unable to get paid by any employers. Soon his money started to run out, and Jason was forced to turn to petty theft and forged checks to afford food. 5 months after starting his criminal career, the law finally caught up with Jason and he did time in juvenile hall. Shortly after his release, he would be arrested and brought back for similar crimes, a cycle that would continue for much of Jason's life. Jason commented on this part of his life in the letter saying, "Being a thief and a liar fit nicely with my lack of self-worth, my silent understanding that I was worthless, a throwaway. The foundations laid in my youth never went away. They simply remained hidden, and everything I chose to do was built on those thoughts and feelings from the past. I'd started down a long, winding path of deception and self-abuse." By the time he was 20 years old, Jason had spent over half of his adult life behind bars. The time not spent in prison was occupied by drugs and dead-end jobs. At 30 years old, Jason decided a change of scenery might be what he needed to bring his life in order, and he soon found himself back in his home state of Alaska. For a while, it seemed like life was improving, but that wouldn't last. Jason was finding joy in the little things again and was able to support himself through a legitimate job. Unfortunately, Jason lost the job a few months later and once again found himself resorting to crime. This would lead to a 6-year prison sentence, shortly followed by another 3-year stint in prison when Jason was caught violating his parole. After being released in the summer of 2016, Jason was once again aiming to live a humble and simple life. But those plans changed when he began to hear rumors of men in his community who were taking advantage of children. According to Jason, hearing these rumors made him think back to his own horrific childhood, and he felt the overwhelming urge to take matters into his own hands and hunt down the offenders in his area. These actions inevitably led to Jason being caught. He was eventually brought to the exact same courthouse his monstrous stepfather was tried. Despite many lauding Jason and calling his actions heroic, he ended his letter by discouraging copycat behavior, stating, "If you have already lost your youth like me due to a child abuser, please do not throw away your present and your future by committing acts of violence." While it can be tempting to explain away Jason's violent actions because he was abused, it's important to remember that many abuse victims don't go on to engage in criminal behavior. However, being abused or neglected as a child can increase the likelihood of arrest as a juvenile by 59%, as an adult by 28%, and for a violent crime by 30%. Many victims of abuse develop revenge fantasies where they imagine themselves standing up to their abuser and fighting back. In Jason's case, these fantasies may have made him feel all-powerful or divinely righteous to the point that he felt he was capable of making these revenge fantasies a reality by hunting down local offenders. Not only was Jason able to get symbolic revenge against the man who hurt him, but he was also able to help other children in the process by doing for them what he wished someone would have done for him. While Jason may have been able to gain some catharsis for his trauma through this revenge, he paid the ultimate price for it. In the days leading up to his official sentencing, Jason wrote another letter to the Anchorage Daily News, this time detailing his life story, explaining how he found himself in this situation and discouraging other victims of abuse from following in his steps. He wrote, "To those who understand how it feels to live through abuse and carry it with you, let me share my story in an effort to prevent its repetition." Much of the public was on Jason's side, and they rallied for him to be given a light sentencing. In the end, Jason was given a plea deal that would reduce his charges. He recounted how officials reacted to his plea deal.
I wrote them an offer through the newspaper to the prosecutor's office, and I told them I will plead guilty to any combination of charges you wish, anything you want, with the following caveat. My sentence is to equal in length what each pedophile served in prison for harming a child. So the guy that raped his own daughter received 2 years and change. I'll serve his 2 years and change. The guy that was convicted of molesting his 10-month-old granddaughter got 3 years in prison. I'll serve his 3 years. So now we're at 5 years, 5.5 years. The child pornographer did 2 years, or did a year and a program or something. So I'll do his, and I told them I'll even serve the 3 years in prison that you suspended for the monster that made me. So I'll do 9 years, 6 months, run that right now. I'll sign, I'll plead to whatever you want. And of course, they summarily laughed that offer out of the courtroom and said, this is not how we conduct business in the state of Alaska.
He was eventually sentenced to 25 years in prison. Not only was the public opinion of Jason incredibly high, but after being sent to prison, Jason discovered that many of the guards and fellow prisoners also considered Jason a hero, especially when his sentence was 3 times longer than the combined sentences of the men Jason assaulted. While being processed into prison, it was discovered that Jason was suffering from PTSD, which he believes was a factor in his crimes. Research shows an association between being the victim of trauma, especially chronic victimization, and the later perpetration of a crime. After serving the first 4 years of his sentence, he attempted to appeal, stating that his PTSD should have been taken into account during the sentencing process. However, this appeal was denied, and his sister Angelina has taken to social media to advocate for her brother's freedom. She's also managed to gather over 27,000 signatures on a Change.org petition, calling for Jason's release. Speaking to Jason from prison, he wanted to make one thing clear.
It's also important for people to know that never at any time was it me that went and sought out any sort of notoriety for this.
Since being in prison, he's reflected a lot not only on his own life, but that of some of the people he's met behind bars.
In retrospect, after being educated while being in here, you realize that childhood trauma is rocket fuel for everything destructive that a person has in their life. And no one tells you this, and no one comes along and gives you any pointers or indications or anything. You get jail sentences, and people tell you you're bad and horrible. And for me, I was a thief and a liar for many years of my life. You never stop to think why. I started getting letters from people all over the world, and contrary to what you might think, these weren't letters with high praise and accolades and pats on the back and things like that. Typically, these letters were 2 or 3 or 4 page descriptions of people's pain and the suffering and the things they went through when they were a kid. As I started realizing I wasn't alone. While I've been in prison, I have done informal surveys, and I'm telling you, the percentage is so high. Guys that end up leading a life of crime or drug addiction or demonstrate criminal behavior, it is so high, like probably 70 or 80% of these guys suffered childhood trauma or abuse. In my free time, I do a lot of writing. It was really cool. It's just actually finished a book with Professor Joshua Long at UMass in Boston. We co-wrote a book together called Legacy of Retribution. There's a guy named that runs a hardcore recovery coaching business, and he's offered me a job as a recovery coach, a trauma and addiction recovery coach, which is great. Probably devote the meaningful portion of the rest of my life to doing some sort of lasting legislative pursuit to change some of the laws pertaining to child abuse. Certainly in my state, maybe nationwide, would like to create an SOS app that allows kids to self-report abuse if they're suffering in the household. And that to me seems like a huge missing component in our society. And if that isn't a glaring, issue, I don't know what is, and people need to pay attention to that. The justice system needs to be realigned.
Jason was granted parole at his hearing on April 10, 2023. However, in a seemingly unprecedented move, his actual release date was set for April 11, 2028. Our most recent communication from Jason came in the form of a message on May 25, 2023. and reads as follows. Thanks for the kind message. I appreciate the support. Also, let everyone know that the book that I wrote with Professor Long is available for pre-order on June 30th, Barnes & Noble. It's called Avenging Child Abuse. Let me know if you want to do any follow-up conversations. I'm just trying to come to terms with the whole decision and do my time as quietly as possible. Needless to say, it was worth it to me then. It's worth it to me now. But you are correct, this was a very, very strange decision by the board. No classes to take, no further therapy available, just more time required. Odd. The circumstances of the 5-year delay of Jason's release are unclear and seem to be based on the inner workings of Alaska's parole system.
Ackerman moved toward the blast zone. The ground floor corner suite. Magyar Cosmetica was a gaping maw. The ceiling had collapsed. Insulation and drywall hung in ribbons. Is anybody hurt? Ackerman shouted to a firefighter who was dragging a hose line. The firefighter looked pale. We've got body parts. Loss of life is a guarantee. Ackerman stepped over a piece of twisted metal. He saw it then. The devastation was total. It wasn't just a fire, it was a high-velocity detonation. The blast wave had shredded everything in its path. 2 women were being led away, covered in dust, blood trickling from cuts on their faces. They were in shock, their eyes wide and vacant. They were the survivors, the clients who had been in the spa. One of them, a mother, was trembling violently. She opened the box. The woman stammered to a paramedic. Il dico, she was at the desk. She opened the box and then, the woman made a motion with her hands. An expanding sphere. A box, Ackerman noted. His mind raced to the news from Texas earlier that year. The Austin bomber. Was this a copycat? Was this terrorism? Was there another device? Clear the area, Ackerman ordered. He moved closer to what had been the reception desk. Lying amidst the rubble were the remains of Ildiko Krajniak. It was a sight that defied the brain's ability to process. The human form is not meant to be unmade so violently. Ackerman forced himself to look. Embedded in the ceiling, high above the crater, he saw something small and metallic glinting in the tactical light. He squinted. It looked like the casing of a battery. He looked down at the floor. The suit was grayish-white, not the black soot of a wood fire. Flash powder, he realized. High explosive. Someone built this to kill her. Specifically her. Jerez, Bezen, Jerez. Jerez, and this wasn't random terrorism. This was personal. This was hate wrapped in cardboard. Chapter Tessera. The arrangement. 3 days earlier, Ildiko Krajniak had been tired. She had just returned from Hungary, a trip back to the motherland to see family, to breathe the air of Budapest, to remember who she was before she became a suburban Californian spa owner. She had traveled with Laszlo, a man from her past, a man who made her laugh, a man who wasn't her husband. Ildiko's life was a complex tapestry of men. There was Ronilo, the husband, a good man, quiet, who took care of her mother. They lived together in the same house on a cul-de-sac, raised their son, shared meals, but they occupied different emotional continents. They had an arrangement. He looked the other way. She sought the affection she craved elsewhere. Then there was Stephen Beale, the man she had met on a dating site 2 years ago. They had traveled the world together. Paris, Portugal, Canada. He had invested in her spa, helped her sign the lease. He wrote her poems. He told her she was the woman he had dreamed of. But Stephen was heavy. His love felt like a gravity well. He checked her schedule too often. He texted too much. When she tried to pull away, he held on tighter. She had broken it off romantically, or at least she tried to. We are better as business partners, she had told him. He had smiled that soft, grandfatherly smile. Of course, Ildiko, whatever you need, I just want you to be happy. But, was he happy? On her way back from Hungary, she had stopped in San Francisco to say goodbye to Laszlo. They had held hands in the airport. Then she flew to Lax. And who was there to pick her up? Stephen. He was waiting at baggage claim, smiling. He drove her home. He carried her bags. He was the perfect ex-boyfriend. The helpful partner. I have some things for the spa, she had mentioned during the drive. Supplies. I'll help you with everything, Stephen had said. You just rest. Now, standing in her spa on that Tuesday morning, and a brown cardboard box. She didn't remember ordering it. Maybe Stephen had brought it in? Or maybe it was a skincare shipment she had forgotten about in the jet lag haze. She picked up a box cutter. I'm just going to open this, she said, to the client waiting on the table. She sliced the tape. She lifted the flap. For a microsecond, the circuit connected. The battery pushed electrons through the wire. The wire heated up, glowing red hot in the darkness of the box. The heat touched the flash powder. Ildiko didn't have time to scream. Chapter Tuesday night, May 15, 2018. The sun had set, but the flashing lights of the police cruisers kept the neighborhood in a state of artificial noon. Stephen Beale sat on his couch. He had already done the interview with the police over the phone. He had told them he was the business partner. He had told them he was worried. Now, he waited. He knew they would come. It was part of the script. The grieving partner is always questioned. The Kanadef, I partale, partale, partale. The Kanadef, I partale, staletef. The Kanadef, I partale, or maseri. A knock at the door. Not a polite rap, but a command. Stephen stood up. Standing there were two men in suits, flanked by uniformed deputies. Stephen Beale? Yes? Stephen's voice was steady. Is there news? Is Ildiko okay? Agent Vicentia studied the man in the doorway. Mr. Beale. Stephen stepped back, gesturing widely with his arm, a welcoming host. Please, come in. Anything to help. As the officer stepped into the foyer, they looked to the left. What's in those? Vicentia asked. Oh, Stephen said, his eyes flicking to the boxes. Just some things for a remodel. Benign stuff. Vicentia signaled to his partner. Check them. Stephen sat down at his dining table. Did she make it? He asked. Nobody will tell me. Ildiko Krajniak is deceased, Vicentia said flatly. Stephen put his head in his hands. My God, Stephen said. Who would do this? We were hoping you could tell us, Vicentia said. No, Stephen said, looking up. His eyes were dry. She had complicated relationships. Other men. But murder? No. I can't imagine. And you, Mr. Beale? Vicentia asked, his eyes drifting toward the garage door, where the smell of chemicals was faintly seeping through. Do you have any experience with explosives? Stephen paused. He knew this was the pivotal scene, the monologue that would define his character arc. Well, Stephen said, a small, nostalgic smile touching his lips. I used to build rockets. Model rockets. Big ones. It was a hobby. An obsession, really. He leaned forward. But that was years ago. Dialiso. Echo. Parteu. The Performance of Innocence. Chapter 6. The Alchemist's Garage. Wednesday, May 16, 2018. The air inside Stephen Beale's Long Beach home was stagnant, heavy with the scent of old dust, and something sharper a chemical tang. Orange County Sheriff's investigator, Jack Ackerman, stood in the garage, his boots crunching softly on the concrete. To the untrained eye, it was just clutter. To Ackerman, it was a munitions factory disguised as a junkyard. Shelves lined the walls, groaning under the weight of plastic tubs and canisters. Labels, handwritten in black marker, identified the contents: potassium perchlorate, aluminum powder, sulfur. He says it's for model rockets, a tech murmured, lifting a container of oxidizer with a gloved hand. Says he hasn't touched the stuff in years. Ackerman frowned. He knew what oxidizers did. They were the breath of a bomb, the chemical agent, and here they were, pounds of the stuff, sitting in a suburban garage. In the corner, they found something even more theatrical: tubes that looked like dynamite. Red cylinders, bundled together with black tape and wires. Movie props, Stephen had told them earlier, waving a hand dismissively. Ackerman walked out to the driveway where Stephen sat, watching the search with the detached interest of a neighbor, watching a lawn being mowed. He was just waiting. Mr. Bill, Ackerman said, leaning against his cruiser. Stephen shrugged, a gesture of practiced nonchalance. Like I said, obsession. My friend and I, we built a Cospende-foot rocket once. 4 stages. It's harmless. Harmless, Ackerman repeated. Your business partner was just vaporized by a device that likely used these exact chemicals. You understand how that looks? Stephen looked him in the eye. I rely on evidence, investigator. It would just be a coincidence. Ackerman felt a chill. Most people, when accused of possessing murder weapons, screamed their innocence. Stephen Bill was debating the statistical probability of coincidence. I don't know who would want to hurt her, Stephen said again, returning to his script. But inside the house, the investigators were finding cracks in the happy business partner facade. They found photos, texts, the remnants of a romance that Stephen claimed was dead, yet clearly still haunted the hallways of this house. Chapter 7. The interrogation room. The room was small, the walls padded with soundproofing that sucked the life out of the air. Stephen Bill sat across from Ackerman and an FBI agent. The camera in the corner blinked a slow, red eye. Stephen wasn't nervous. You know, Stephen said, leaning back in his chair, this reminds me of a screenplay I'm writing. Ackerman blinked. A screenplay? Yes. Stephen nodded enthusiastically. It's about a soccer mom who is a part-time assassin. She's very good. She plans every step, covers her tracks. The detectives exchanged a glance. Was he taunting them? Confessing through fiction? Or was he simply delusional? Stephen continued, his voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. He told jokes. He offered anecdotes about the acting world. Then, in a moment that defied all procedural logic, he leaned forward. What's this? He reached behind the FBI agent's ear and produced a coin. A sleight of hand trick, a parlor game performed for the men trying to put him on death row. You're kidding me, the agent said flatly. No, Stephen smiled. It's all about misdirection. Ackerman felt his gut tighten. Mr. Bill, he said, cutting through the performance. Let's talk about Ildiko. You said you had the means. You admitted you have the chemicals. I suppose I could fall into that category, Stephen conceded, as if discussing a casting type. If the chemicals are right, and motive? Ackerman pressed. You loved her. She moved on. She was sleeping with other men. That hurts, doesn't it? Stephen shook his head. No. Love gone wrong? No, not at all. He was impenetrable. He wrapped himself in layers of eccentricity and extraneous details that led nowhere. He was playing the role of the quirky, harmless artist, so hard that Ackerman wanted to scream. I think he thinks he's outsmarting everybody, Ackerman thought. But the FBI didn't care about magic tricks. They looked at the movie prop dynamite. They looked at the oxidizers. 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 Stephen Beale, the agent said, standing up. You are under arrest for possession of unregistered destructive devices. Stephen looked surprised, but only for a moment. Chapter 8. 2 weeks earlier, Valerie Stone was tired of men who lived in the past. She sat in her living room, scrolling through the dating app, her thumb swiping left with the ruthlessness of a woman who knew what she didn't want. Her profile was a warning label. She wanted a clean slate, someone present. Then she saw him, Stephen. He looked kind, older, distinguished, a grandfatherly figure who listed actor and executive consultant as his professions. He looked safe. She swiped right. Their first date was electric. They talked for hours. No holds barred. Valerie would later tell her friends. Complete honesty. Saznata dua, tustata dua, saznata da dua. Stephen was upfront about everything. I have a business partner, Ildiko, he said over dinner. We used to date, but that's over. She's wonderful, but she's moved on. She's dating other people. He spoke of Ildiko with such warmth, such lack of jealousy. She's a cute little bunny, he said. Beautiful inside and out. 7 little. Valerie watched him closely. She was listening for the bitterness, the telltale sign of a man scorned. She heard nothing but friendship. I was completely okay with it, she decided. Present day. May 2018. Valerie stared at the television. The face of the man she had fallen for, the kind, honest man, was plastered next to the words suspected bomber. Her phone was blowing up. Friends, family, everyone asking the same question. Is that him? It's a mistake, she whispered. She thought about the last month. A man who wrote love poems couldn't vaporize a woman in a day spa. He didn't do it, she told her reflection. He's just eccentric. But doubt is a persistent weed. It sprouted in the back of her mind. Unregistered destructive devices. That sounded serious. However, just a week later, the narrative twisted again. The phone rang. It was Stephen. I'm coming home, he said. What? They dropped the charges, Val. It turned out the destructive devices were ambiguous. The FBI lab couldn't definitively rule out that the pipes were just for rocketry, just like Stephen said. The federal prosecutor, Mark Takla, had to concede. Without more evidence, they couldn't hold him. Valerie drove to the jail. A quirky old man, misunderstood by a rigid system. Nightmare over, she said, hugging him. Nightmare over. He agreed. They were both wrong. Chapter 9. June, Yelendesiten. Freedom felt fragile. Stephen and Valerie tried to return to normalcy. They went grocery shopping, they ran errands. But the town of Aliso Viejo felt different now. Eyes lingered on them. Whispers trailed in their wake. One afternoon, they were driving down the freeway, the radio playing softly. Then, the lights flashed, blue and red, filling the rearview mirror. Oh God. Valerie breathed. Stephen pulled over to the shoulder. Stay calm, he said. The deputy approached the window. Valerie grabbed her phone and hit record. Why are you stopping us? She demanded, her voice shaking. You released him. You dropped the charges. What is the problem? They stood on the side of the highway for 3 hours. It was a spectacle. A bomb-sniffing dog circled their car, its nose working the seams of the doors. 13 police cars lined the road behind them. A blockade of intimidation. Those are posters. Valerie snapped as a deputy rifled through the trunk. You can open them. They found nothing. To Valerie, it was harassment. It was the state trying to crush a man because they couldn't solve a crime. It solidified her resolve. They were the victims here. Stephen was innocent, and she would be his shield. I've dated so many losers, she thought. I finally find a good man, and the universe tries to take him away. But Stephen's daughter, Charlene, saw it differently. They want to bring whoever did this to justice, Charlene said quietly. Chapter 10. The Paper Trail. FBI Field Office. Summer 2018. While Stephen and Valerie played the role of persecuted lovers, the task force was buried in data. Agent Vicencia rubbed his eyes. We need to go deeper into the financials, Vicencia said. Every transaction, every ATM withdrawal, every receipt, they combed through thousands of lines of bank data. It was tedious, mind-numbing work, but then a hit. A purchase at a Staples store. Just around the corner from the spa. When was this? Vicencia asked, leaning over the analyst's shoulder. A week before the bombing, they pulled the CCTV footage. There was Stephen Beale, wearing his nondescript clothes, standing at the checkout. He was buying a cardboard box, a 12 copy XX box. Vicencia pulled up the interview with the survivor. It matches, Vicencia said. It's just a box, Nick. Another agent played devil's advocate. Keep looking, Vicencia ordered. Then came the second hit. An ATM withdrawal. Cash. Why cash? Vicencia mused. Stephen Beale used cards for everything. Why pull cash now? They traced the location. The ATM was near a CVS. Vicencia's heart rate spiked. The battery. The 9-volt battery found in the ceiling. It was a CVS brand. They pulled the surveillance from the CVS. Grainy video. A man at the counter. Stephen Beale. Stephen Beale. He placed a single item on the belt. A 9-volt battery. He paid in cash. Vicencia sat back in his chair. Who buys one battery with cash a week before his ex-girlfriend is blown up by a bomb powered by that exact battery? Vicencia asked the room. Nobody, the analyst said, unless they don't want to be tracked. He thinks he's smarter than us, Vicencia said, looking at the image of Stephen Beale on the screen. He thinks this is a movie. The agent picked up the phone. It was time to change tactics. They didn't just need evidence. They needed a confession. And to get a confession from a man who thought he was the smartest person in the room, they needed someone on the inside. They needed Valerie. De Aliso, Echo, Part 3. Chapter 11. Autumn 2018. Valerie Stone was in love. It was a fierce, protective love, born in the crucible of public scrutiny and forged by the shared trauma of the roadside stop. Stephen Beale had asked her to marry him. He hadn't done it with a grand, pyrotechnic display, but with a quiet, intense sincerity. He wrote her a love letter, the kind that feels like an anchor in a storm. She said yes, without hesitation. She had moved into his Long Beach home. She had gone through his drawers, his socks, the nooks and crannies of his life. She had performed her own warrantless search and found nothing but the mundane artifacts of a retiree. The ring was beautiful, a diamond solitaire, a little over a carat, catching the light as she drove to work. Then came the black Suburban. It pulled up to her workplace, sleek and ominous, the kind of vehicle that doesn't ask for permission. Valerie Stone, we need to talk to you. She got in. She didn't feel she had a choice. They drove her to a nearby park, a neutral ground where the birds chirped oblivious to the gravity of the conversation. Leave your electronics in the car, the agent instructed. They walked her to a bench. Valerie looked down and gasped. But it was the other photos, the biological reality of what happens when a human body meets high explosives, that made her stomach turn. This is what happened to Ildiko Krajniak, the agent said. And this is Stephen buying the box that killed her. He pointed to a surveillance still of Stephen at Staples. Valerie looked at the grainy photo. It was Stephen, yes. But buying a box? Everyone buys boxes. We need your help. Valerie, the agent said. We need you to wear a wire. Valerie stared at them. They wanted her to betray the man she was going to marry. They wanted her to be an informant. I don't think he did it, she said, her voice trembling. Then help us prove it, the agent countered. Or help us catch the monster who did. Whoever did this deserves to be behind bars. Even if it's Stephen. Valerie looked at the diamond on her finger. She looked at the photos of the carnage. The cognitive dissonance threatened to split her in two. If Stephen was innocent, he had nothing to hide. If he was guilty. Okay, she whispered. I'll do it. Chapter 12. The weekend getaway. The weekend getaway. The plan was elaborate. Stephen and Valerie had already scheduled a romantic getaway, a wine hike in Malibu. It was supposed to be a celebration of their engagement, a weekend to leave the troubles of Aliso Viejo behind. The FBI saw it differently. To them, it was a soundstage. We'll pay for the hotel, the agents told her. They offered upgrades, perks that certainly weren't in the standard package. Valerie signed the consent forms. By the time she and Stephen checked in, the room was infested with hidden cameras and microphones. There's not just 2 people in the room, Valerie thought, as she unpacked her bag. There's 25, and 23 of them are watching. The agents had given her a necklace. Where did you get that? Stephen might ask. Valerie rehearsed her line in the mirror of the hotel bathroom. Oh, look, what I found. I hadn't seen this in forever. I thought I lost it. She clasped it around her neck. It felt heavy, like a collar. The weekend was a nightmare of forced casualness. They hiked through the vineyards, the California sun golden on the grapes. Stephen was relaxed, happy. He held her hand. He talked about the future. Valerie was acting for her life. The agents had given her a script of sorts, topics to bring up, triggers to pull. Ask him about Ildiko. Ask him about the box. Get him angry. Stephen, she said as they sat overlooking the ocean, her heart hammering against the wire on her chest. It's just so awful about Ildiko. Do you think they'll ever find who did it? Stephen sighed, looking out at the waves. I hope so, Val. It's a tragedy. His voice was calm, steady. There was no crack in the veneer, no flash of anger, no slip of the tongue. She tried again later, in the hotel room. She pushed him, trying to elicit an outburst, trying to see the monster the FBI insisted was there. People are saying you did it, Stephen. Doesn't that make you mad? It's frustrating, he said, pouring a glass of wine. But I can't let it control me. I know who I am. He was cool. Valerie felt a strange mix of relief and confusion. He's not taking the bait, she thought, because there is no bait to take. He's innocent. Or, a darker thought whispered. By Sunday, the operation was a bust. No confession, no incrimination, just a couple on a free vacation, watched by a frustrated team of federal agents. Later, unable to bear the weight of the deception, Valerie told him. Stephen, she said, bracing herself for the explosion. I was wearing a wire. The FBI. They made me do it. She waited for the rage. The betrayal. Allah. Stephen just looked at her. He didn't yell. He didn't throw things. He seemed almost... It's okay, Val, he said softly. I know they pressured you. To Valerie, it was proof of his saintliness. To the FBI, it was the reaction of a sociopath who knew he had beaten the house. Chapter 13. 12 Angry Jurors. Winter. Stephen Beale returned to his true passion, the theater. He was cast in a local production of Them 2 Angry Jurors, the stage adaptation of the classic legal drama. It was a choice so laden with irony it felt scripted. Stephen Beale, the prime suspect in a murder investigation. The FBI agents bought tickets. They sat in the darkened audience, watching the man they were trying to imprison recite lines about justice and reasonable doubt. Just remember that this is a first-degree murder charge, Stephen intoned from the stage, his voice projecting to the back row. Aggie and Vicencia watched, unamused. They were also investigating Stephen's disability claims. He had been collecting checks for years, claiming aphasia, memory loss, and an inability to read. Yet here he was, memorizing entire scripts and performing without a hitch. "He's mocking us," Vicencia muttered. "Art illuminating life." Stephen knew they were there. Maybe he thinks the play is the thing wherein he'll catch the conscience of the king, or at least prove his competence to the world. But the reviews that mattered weren't coming from the theater critics. They were coming from the forensics lab. The FBI finally had the complete picture. The chemical analysis of the residue found at the bomb site matched the chemicals in Stephen's garage perfectly. The specific mixture of flash powder, the battery fragments, the box perches, the isolation of the movie prop wires. It wasn't one smoking gun. It's time. Chapter 14, the second act, March 3, 2019. It was a Sunday morning. The air was crisp. Stephen kissed Valerie goodbye and left to run errands. "I'll be back soon," he promised. Valerie stayed in bed, enjoying the quiet. Then the phone rang. It was Stephen. His voice was tight. "I've just been arrested." Before she could respond, the phone was handed to a special agent. "Mrs. Stone, we have Mr. Beale in custody." This wasn't a catch and release. The charge was malicious destruction of a building resulting in death. Essentially, a murder charge. Valerie was in shock. "There's no way," she told herself. "There's no way they have a case." But Stephen didn't come home this time. Days turned into weeks. Weeks into months. Stephen sat in a federal detention center, denied bond. 4 years passed. 4 years of motions, delays, and a pandemic. Valerie waited. She visited. She kept the ring on her finger. Chapter 15. The hung jury. The trial. 2022. The courtroom was a sterile arena of fluorescent light and wood paneling. The prosecution laid out their theory. Obsession, humiliation, revenge. They played a love poem. Stephen had recorded for Ildiko, "I love how when I dream of my life partner." They showed the jury the text messages Stephen had found on Ildiko's phone, translated from Hungarian. Messages from Laszlo, the other lover. They argued that Stephen had discovered these during their trip, realized he was being played, and decided that if he couldn't have her, no one would. They played the video of Stephen teaching viewers how to mix explosive chemicals safely. "This is extremely gentle," Stephen said in the video, pouring volatile powder like he was baking a cake. "It will not cause the formulation to spark." He had the expertise, the prosecutor argued. He had the chemicals. He had the motive. He had the motive. He had the chemicals. But Stephen's defense team, led by Craig Harbaugh, told a different story. He moved on. Harbaugh insisted. "Look at the texts. Miss you too, love. Does that sound like a murderer?" They pointed fingers elsewhere. At the handyman, Max, who slept in the spa. At Elizabeth Papp, the scorned wife who had sent hounding photos to Ildiko. At Ronilo, the husband who knew about the affairs. "Probability is not good enough," the defense thundered. "They have the wrong guy." The jury retreated to the deliberation room. Inside, the air grew hot. "He had the materials," said Klaus, one of the jurors. "The battery was shot into the ceiling." "It's the same battery." "But the motive?" countered Marisela. "I don't see the venom. He didn't seem like the type to fly off the handle." The vote was taken. 8 hands for guilty. 4 for not guilty. "It has to be unanimous," the foreman reminded them. They argued. "Probably he did it," Marisela said, "but probably is not good enough. They sent a note to the judge. Deadlocked. Mistrial. The gavel banged. The tension in the room snapped, but resolved nothing. For the prosecutors, it was a crushing setback. For Stephen, a temporary reprieve. A hung jury is better than a wrongful conviction, Stephen said from jail. But he didn't walk free. The government was not giving up. They immediately announced their intention to retry the case. Valerie breathed a sigh of relief, but it was shallow. The nightmare wasn't over. It was just an intermission. De Aliso Echo. Echo, Part 4. Chapter 16. The Anatomy of a Blast. June 2023. The Retrial. The second trial of Stephen Beale began in a different atmosphere. This time, federal prosecutors Mark Takla and Anna Martin Salik were determined to remove the abstract nature of the crime. They weren't just going to tell the jury about the bomb. They were going to show them exactly what it did. The courtroom lights dimmed. The jury, a new set of 12 strangers, watched the screen. It was a recreation. The FBI had built a replica of the device using the exact chemicals found in Stephen Beale's garage, the specific oxidizers, the distinct flash powder mixture. They placed it inside a box, just like the one Ildiko had opened. In the video, a mannequin stood in for Ildiko. 3, 2, 1. The explosion on screen was sudden and violent. It wasn't the cinematic fireball of Hollywood. It was a percussive, shredding force. The mannequin disintegrated. Hands and arms were blown to bits, severed from the body in a way that horrifyingly matched the autopsy photos of Ildiko Krajniak. The silence in the courtroom was heavy, suffocating. The gentle hobbyist narrative that Stephen's defense had cultivated began to crumble under the visceral reality of the physics he had unleashed. The chemicals matched, the prosecutor told them. The battery matched. The box matched. The obsession matched. They hammered home the timeline. They showed how Stephen had checked Ildiko's schedule obsessively. They showed the search history about narcissists beating polygraphs. They stripped away the kindly grandfather mask to reveal the cold calculation underneath. Chapter 17. The Star Witness. The Defense Case. Stephen Beale's new defense team, Megan Blanco and Anthony Solis, had one card left to play. Valerie Stone. Pellery Stone. Stephen Beale's new defense team. Valerie took the stand. She was no longer just a fiancée. She was the proof of Stephen's innocence. The logic was simple, if twisted. How could a man be so obsessed with his ex that he killed her, yet simultaneously be in a happy, committed relationship with a new woman? Psychologically, that is not what jilted lovers do, the defense argued. Valerie sat in the witness box, the diamond ring still on her finger. She recounted the sting operation with a surreal calm. She described the FBI agents, the listening devices, the pressure to get him to confess. I did everything within my power to get him to do something, she testified. And nothing. She told the jury about the moment she confessed her betrayal to Stephen. To Valerie, this was exoneration. It was proof of his gentle nature. But to the prosecution, and perhaps to the jury watching her, it painted a different picture. It showed a man capable of supreme compartmentalization. A man who could look into the eyes of a woman wearing a wire and give her exactly nothing. A man who could withstand the pressure of the federal government without breaking a sweat. He thinks he is the smartest person in the room, the prosecutor had said. And sitting there, watching Valerie defend him, it seemed he might be right. Chapter 18. July 2023. The jury deliberated. In the first trial, the debate had raged for days, ending in a deadlock. There had been shouting, pointing, and doubt. This time, the door to the deliberation room opened after less than 2 hours. Stephen Beale stood up. He smoothed his jacket. He looked at the jury, perhaps expecting another hung verdict, another act in the play. We the jury find the defendant, Stephen Beale, guilty. The words hung in the air. guilty of the use of a weapon of mass destruction, guilty of malicious destruction of a building resulting in death, guilty of the murder of Ildiko Krajniak. In the gallery, Ildiko's family wept. Forever, Ildiko's cousin, it was the end of a 5-year nightmare. I was very happy to have that, very relieved, she said. It's not going to bring her back, but we did something together. Valerie sat stunned. Chapter 19, 897 days. Post-verdict. Post-verdict? It had been 897 days since Valerie Stone had first sat down for an interview with Dateline. In that time, she had moved out of Southern California. She had lost 70 pounds. She had rebuilt her life in a new state. But one thing hadn't changed. You didn't break up with him, the interviewer noted. I do, Valerie said. I believe him wholeheartedly. She still clung to the narrative. If he were guilty, he would have slipped up. He would have confessed during the sting. He wasn't a murderer. He was just misunderstood. Then, the interviewer pulled out a piece of paper. Valerie, I read some text messages between Ildiko and Stephen that were presented to the jury, he said. Valerie paused. Okay. The interviewer began to read. The dates were from April the 50 weeks after. Valerie and Stephen had started dating. Weeks after Stephen had sworn he and Ildiko were just friends. Building a relationship with you is the single most important period of my life, Ildiko. You rock my world. You are the woman that I've always dreamed of. I will love you forever. Valerie blinked. April 28th, the interviewer continued. Valerie looked away. The mask of certainty slipped, just for a second. The man who had told her we are no longer dating, the man who claimed to be solely focused on her, had been sending love sonnets to his ex-girlfriend days before he killed her. That kind of makes me feel right now. I know it's going to come as a shock to you, the interviewer said gently. But sometimes, men say things to women that are not 100% true. No, Valerie whispered, the reality finally piercing the armor. I really need to reevaluate things. I mean, it's been 5 years alone and hoping. Chapter 20. The Empty Chair. January 2024. Stephen Bill, now 64 years old, shuffled into the courtroom for the final time. He wore the orange jumpsuit of a federal inmate. The acting days were over. The rockets were gone. The magic tricks had run out. The judge pronounced the sentence. Life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Stephen Bill would die in a cage. Outside the courthouse, the air was cold but clear. Eva stood before the cameras, her face lined with the exhaustion of grief but lightened by justice. After 5 years of waiting and wondering, our family and friends had peace, she said. But peace is not the same as restoration. The bomb had done its work. It had taken a mother, a friend, a sunshine, Holly Salcedo, the friend who had heard the explosion from her kitchen, thought about the empty chair at the spa. She thought about the way Ildiko used to laugh, the way she could make a client feel like the only person in the world. She has this energy, Holly said, her voice catching. You go in and you're depressed, and you leave the salon and you're flying. Ildiko Krajniak had been a woman who wanted to be loved. She had complicated relationships, she had secrets, but she had been killed not because of who she was, but because one man decided that if he couldn't control her, he would destroy her. The building on Mareblu was repaired. But in Aliso Viejo, beneath the beige stucco and the leafy green trees, the echo of the blast remained a reminder that sometimes the most dangerous things in the world come in small, boring packages, delivered by men who smile and tell you they just want to be friends. Chapter 20. The Architect of Smoke. Years before the blast. Long Beach. The garage was Stephen Bill's sanctuary. It was a place where the chaotic variables of the outside world relationships, finances, acting rejection, could be reduced to simple chemical equations. Here, he wasn't a struggling actor or a consultant on disability. He was an engineer of awe. He was an engineer of awe. He stood over a workbench, mixing powders with the precision of a jeweler. Potassium perchlorate, aluminum, sulfur. To the uninitiated, they were just dust. To Stephen, they were potential energy waiting for a command. It became almost an obsession, he would later admit to investigators. He wasn't making small battle rockets for children. He was building giants. He and a friend had constructed a beast. A 25-foot tall rocket, 6 inches in diameter. It was a 4-stage vessel designed to pierce the cloud layer. When it launched, the sound was a physical thing, a roar that vibrated in the chest. Stephen loved that power. He loved the gentleness of mixing highly sensitive materials, the knowledge that he held destruction and creation in his hands, separated only by a spark. But as the years passed, the rockets stopped flying. The tubes gathered dust in the rafters. The chemicals, however, remained. They sat in plastic tubs, silent and patient. Stephen didn't throw them away. When he met Ildiko, he didn't show her the chemistry. He showed her the romance. But the architect of smoke was always there, waiting in the garage, knowing that if love failed, chemistry never would. Chapter 22. Δέχαλιος 16. The romance began with a swipe, like so many modern tragedies. Stephen Bill and Ildiko Krajniak matched on a dating app. For Ildiko, Stephen was a breath of fresh air. He was older, yes, but he was attentive. He was an executive consultant, a man of the world. He wanted to take her places. We went away a lot, Stephen would later recall. Portugal, Canada, Paris. They were exclusively dating, wrapped in the bubble of new love. Stephen was a master of the love bomb, a different kind of explosive, one made of affection and grand gestures. He wrote her poems. I love how, when I dream of my life partner, the only person that I can see is you. He texted her at 3 a.m. Pillows not the same, I miss you. Pillows not the same, I miss you. But slowly, the dynamic shifted. The attentive lover became the watchful warden. They became business partners. They signed the lease for the spa together. Stephen wasn't just in her bed. He was in her books. He was in her schedule. Then came the money. Ildiko had given him access to her accounts, trusting him to help manage the business. But then, she changed her password. Stephen felt the door close. She changed her password for seemingly no reason, he complained to investigators. The grievance still fresh years later. He confronted her. What happened to me? The mask of the cool, collected partner began to slip. He realized he wasn't the only one. She was hiding things. Stephen didn't scream. He didn't fight. He just observed. He checked her Facebook. He checked her appointments. He watched the revolving door of men. He began to feel humiliated. He, the man who had given her everything, was being replaced by a cast of characters he deemed inferior. He didn't break up with her. He didn't walk away. He bought a battery. Chapter 23. The Invisible Wounds. May 15, 2018. The Aftermath. While the investigation focused on the hunt for the bomber, a quiet devastation was unfolding in the hospitals of Orange County. 2 other women had been in the spa that day. They weren't the targets. They were just collateral damage in Stephen Bill's war on Ildiko. One of them, a mother, lay in a hospital bed, her body riddled with debris. She closed her eyes and saw the flash. Over and over again, she told the first responder what she saw. Ildiko standing at the desk. The box. The opening of the lid. Bright light. Then darkness. The shockwave hadn't just broken their bones. It had shattered their sense of safety. They had gone to a place of beauty and healing, a day spa, and found a war zone. For years, They would deal with the medical repercussions, surgeries, therapy, the inability to hear a loud noise without flinching. And then there was Holly Salcedo. Holly hadn't been in the room, but her heart was there. She was the one who knew Ildiko's secrets. She was the one who knew about the 5 or 6 boyfriends. She sat in her home, a mile from the blast site, staring at her phone. She remembered the texts, the laughter, the way Ildiko could make her feel like she was flying. She was sunshine in some of my darkest days, Holly whispered. Holly felt a specific kind of guilt, the guilt of the survivor and the guilt of the confidante. She knew Ildiko was playing a dangerous game with romance. She knew about the affairs. She knew about the jealousy. I knew she had her boyfriends on the side, Holly told the police.